All right. Thank you everyone for coming out here tonight. This is Sargent Memorial Library, and I'm Megan Bouffard, and I'm the Information Services Librarian here. We have Rachel Harrison and Emily C. Hughes for a little discussion about horror. This is a program that's part of Summer Scares, which is an annual reading program from the Horror Writers Association. Rachel's book, Such Sharp Teeth, was one of the summer's adult reading selections. I also want to thank a bunch of people that made this possible, such as our partners, Ashland Public Library, Framingham Public Library, and the Silver Unicorn Bookstore, plus additional Mass libraries that have joined us online. Mina Jane, thank you. She's the director of Ashland Public Library, and she's monitoring the Zoom and has helped me figure out how to do the logistics of all of this. And thanks to the Horror Writers Association and the Summer Scares team and Becky Spratford, who should be online, and without which this probably would not have happened because she connected all of us. We're going to have a Q&A afterwards for people in the audience and online. So if you're on the Zoom, put your questions into the Q&A feature, and I'm going to pass it on to you guys to introduce yourselves and talk a bit.
Well, alphabetically, you're first.
Oh, just by a little. I'm Rachel Harrison. I'm the author of The Return, Cackle, Such Sharp Teeth, which is the Summer Scares pick, Black Sheep, which came out in paperback yesterday, and So Thirsty, which is out September 10th. So please request at your local library. And yeah, that's me.
And I'm Emily C. Hughes. I worked in publishing for a long time, and here I am with my first book, Horror for Weenies. This is out on September 3rd. The subtitle is Everything You Need to Know About the Films You're Too Scared to Watch. This is geared specifically toward people who would rather read the Wikipedia plot synopsis than watch a scary movie. That's you. There are literally dozens of us. Yeah, I am thrilled to be here. I am thrilled to be here with you. This is not our first event together. We did one for Cackle way back in the day.
Yes.
And yeah, well, as the Summer Scares pick, would you like to talk a little bit about the Summer Scares program? Just kind of an overview for folks who might not be familiar.
So Summer Scares is for libraries, and there's a team of librarians who pick 3 adult titles, 3 middle grade titles, 3 young adult titles, and
Do you do children's?
I don't know if there's children's horror. Is there? Okay.
No, they don't do the middle grade is the
Middle grade is
children's.
I was like,
There is children's horror, but
I was just at my friend's house who has a baby, and she kept being like, horror for babies. And I was like, you
That's the
know,
sequel.
like what yeah, horror for babies. So I'm a little like and we talk to librarians about our book. We have like virtual meetings. The authors go and do panels at libraries in person and virtually. And it's really a program just to get more people reading horror and kind of ease in for people who might be intimidated. So I think that's kind of how we're going to frame our chat about like horror for weenies, horror for people who are with the horror curious. Where
Yes, that's, I mean, that's one of the best things about Summer Scares is that it's basically summer reading for grown-ups, which is something that I certainly have been missing since my elementary school days. And it's summer reading for spooky grown-ups, which is even better.
you're way better at pitching the Summer Scares. It's like a thing that happens in the summer and it's scary.
It is one of my favorite things that the Horror Writers Association does. It is a delight to be here to talk about it. And one of the best things about the Summer Scares program is that they place a real emphasis on backlist titles, older titles, so that it gives authors another moment to promote those books. It's one of the ongoing struggles of publishing is getting attention on books that have been out longer than, a few weeks or a few months. And that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, so I want to shout out my 2 fellow, so they picked 3 titles for each
Each group.
each tier. And for adults, the other two picks are Jackal by Erin E. Adams and This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno, which are both like, it was like one, I was like really excited to be a Summer Scares pick, and then I saw like they were the other two, and I was like to be in that company. Just those books are both exceptional. And they're both like debuts. That's a little like, how dare you? Because like this is my third book, but This Thing Between Us and Jackal are their debut novels, and they're like exceptional. So if you haven't read them, go do it.
Yes, very much so. Jackal especially has really just been like, I keep thinking about it, 2 years after I read it. I'm like, yeah, no, that's really stuck with me. So something that I've spent a lot of time focusing on in my career. We're sharing.
I'm gonna get another one. I'm sorry.
I think fine.
On the Zoom, we're having a little bit of.
Trouble here.
Gotcha.
Okay.
We'll see. Is that working?
That is perfect.
That's great. Thank you.
Telling me to be loud. Yeah.
I'm telling a Jersey girl to be loud.
Yeah. If you were telling me to be quiet, then we have a problem.
So one of the things that I have focused on for a long time, even before I wrote this book, is kind of introducing people to horror if they're not already comfortable with it. And a lot of people think, oh, I can't read that stuff, I can't watch that stuff, I'm too scared, it's too gory, it's too disturbing. And something that I feel very strongly about is that there is actually a horror book for everyone. There is something, no matter how much of a scaredy cat, how much of a weenie you are, there is something out there that is classified as horror that you're going to pick up and read and go, oh, I had no idea. And so the book is kind of an extension of that. Although it is more geared towards movies, there are reading recommendations for every movie in the book. And that's one of my favorite things to do, is kind of like extend a hand back and go like, no, there's room for you here too. And one of my go-tos is actually recommending your books, because they're accessible in a really beautiful way. They are scary, but they're also funny and full of heart, and they really speak to the thing that I've always really, I think we're pretty much exactly the same age, right?
Yeah.
So I started reading with your first book, The Return, and I was like, oh, I've never encountered a horror novel that was writing about, like, very specifically about like my age range, my demographic, my experiences. And so that really resonated with me, and it's made me obviously a lifelong fan of your books because you're the best. When people ask you like, oh, I can't, when people say that, oh, I can't read horror, it's too scary, where do you tell them to start?
For my own books, I would say Cackle. I think that's my tamest. And it's like The Pallbearers Club by Paul Tremblay is one of my favorite recent books, but one of my favorite all-time books. And that book isn't like terrifying. There are some scary moments, but like the point of that book is not to scare you. It's like, and I think a lot of horror the point is not to scare you. It's telling a different story. It's doing different work. The scares are just kind of secondary. But I think The Pallbearers Club is great. Alexis Henderson's work, The Year of the Witching, House of Hunger, and her new one, An Academy for Liars. They're a bit more like dark fantasy, but there's some horror in there, but it's like, I think it's manageable. Who else? I think Whisper Down the Lane by Clay McLeod Chapman. That's a good place to start. I mean, his will get like ghost pepper scary, like you like keep going.
Yeah, that escalates quickly with his books. Yeah.
Such a Pretty Smile by Christy DeMeester. That one's more like, I think she's very, and I'm reluctant to use this word literary, but I mean that in the sense that like very beautiful, lush, poetic prose. And it's more of a like feminine rage story than it is like a horror story, but there are scary moments. But I'm very like, I take my book recommendations, I think as you do, very seriously.
Very seriously.
I need to like
interview you, ask you your tastes, like, what's your favorite color? Like, where do
What's
you
your
like to go?
sign?
Yeah, what's your sign? What time were you born? Can you ask your mom? Because that depends, like, I just get very specific, so it depends who's asking. But I think like that's where I would start.
Yeah, those are all fantastic picks.
What about you?
A lot of the time I'll pick something gothic as a starting point, not because gothic books can't be scary or disturbing, but because it's really like, I think there's this misunderstanding about what horror is. If you say horror to someone who's not an experienced reader, they're like, Stephen King. You're like, well, yes, but, and there's so much more. And a lot of horror for a long time has kind of gotten categorized as other genres.
Yeah.
You know, oh, it's a thriller, it's a psychological suspense, it's dark fantasy, it's, you know, whatever. But those horror elements are still very present, and those kind of genre blending books can be a really easy way to get people into the genre. It's like starting someone with not training wheels, because that suggests that it's like less than,
Yeah.
but you know, starting someone on like something a little bit easier. The Little Stranger, Sarah Waters, I think is a great place to start, especially if people like any kind of like period stories. I like to point people who are crime readers toward Katrina Ward.
Yes.
Yeah, Last House on Needless Street, Looking Glass Sound. There's a lot of horror elements in her books, but they're fundamentally, you know, character-driven stories, and they are kind of uncategorizable. So there's something in there for everyone. I would say a lot of times I'll point people towards Stephen Graham Jones, specifically The Only Good Indians.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you're gonna start them, like, this
Yeah.
last, like, brilliant writer, but like, not, he doesn't care about your feelings.
No, he's gonna wreck you. He's
Yeah.
absolutely gonna destroy you. And yeah, it would be tougher to start someone who's not a horror reader on, say, the Indian Lake trilogy.
Right.
Because that is so, I mean, his books are so conversant in horror tropes.
Yes.
But The Only Good Indians specifically it has that sort of genre blending, you know, expansive scope that I think can really welcome people in.
Yeah, that was my first book of his that I read. And I think it's just so, like, you're in it from page one. He does such a great job of like pulling you in. And I think that's, if you're like, I don't know if I can get into horror, and you like open up that book, he's gonna prove you that you.
Oh, it has one of the best opening
Yes.
you know, chapters. I can't remember if it's a, you know, introductory or it's a forward
Right.
chapter, but it's one of the most arresting introductory chapters to anything I've read in years. And I mean, honestly, I think he kind of has something similar to your writing, which is a very distinctive style that's very accessible. Like, he's a brilliant writer, and he's incredibly good at setting a scene and developing characters and all that, but the actual style of his prose is so conversational.
Yeah.
It's like I've described it this way before, but it really is just kind of the perfect image for me. Is you're sitting in a bar somewhere dusty and like forgotten at like 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, and you're just having a beer, and there's a guy 3 bar stools down nursing his own beer, and he's just telling you a story.
Yeah.
And that's Stephen's writing. It's like you're like, this is I'm not sure how to process this, and then all of a sudden you're drawn in and you can't think about anything else.
Yeah. You're like, why is this guy? Oh my God, this is the most charismatic person I will listen to you forever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and honestly, with horror for weenies, it's been kind of fun putting that, you know, like you, I take my book recommendations very, very seriously. You know, the tone has to be right, the subject matter has to be right. And so with horror for weenies, the brief for this book was, you know, as I said earlier, for people who would rather read the Wikipedia plot synopsis than watch the movie. But the thing that for a long time, I myself was a weenie. I'm now a reformed weenie. And for a long time, I couldn't watch horror. I could only read it. and reading it was my way back into watching it. So I had sort of a like, oh, I don't, I can't do scary movies. I can't do scary movies. I really like weird books though. And so I was kind of hoping with this book to provide that same avenue for people who might not think that horror is for them. Every movie in the book, there are 25 movies in the book. Each one has 3 book recommendations for people who are curious but can't quite bring themselves to watch. And that's honestly, it's really important to me. I've gotten people reading horror in my life who never thought that they would. My mother, who's here tonight, who's a Stephen Graham Jones super fan and a Rachel Harrison super fan, which is wonderful. Yeah, I don't know. It's you particularly over the past 5 years, your career has just been like on the rise. What kind of conversations are you having with people who might not, or do people come up to you and say, oh, I don't read horror, but I love your books?
I get more like, I feel like a gateway drug. Like I get people being like, I thought I didn't like it, and then I picked up one of your books and I really liked it. I'm gonna shout out Terry, who's a bookseller at Barnes and Noble and at Eastview Mall, who said like, I didn't think I liked it, and then I read Cackle. And then I've read everything, and just like I think Black Sheep's my favorite. I'm like, that gets kind of dark. Like so I think that, and to me, that's the best compliment. That like somebody's like, I didn't think I liked it, but I picked up your books, and now I'm like, so we both get to be gateway drugs. And I also think what's so great about War for Weenies is it's so funny. Like it's, yes, it's a guide, and yes, it has book recommendations, and like, but like, you read a Wikipedia page and it's like, okay, now I know what happens. But this is like reading the Wikipedia page if it was like extremely well written and also hilarious. But I think that like that helps because it's not just like and it's not pretentious. And I think that's kind of where like people talk a lot about how horror's having a moment, horror's having a moment. I think horror isn't pretentious, especially right now. Maybe it was in the past, but like there's so many new voices that I feel like there's this like energy of like, come on, like you're welcome here. There's something for you, and not like, oh, you didn't see, long legs. That's like, get out of here. Like, I don't want to talk to you. Like,
Right.
You've never seen The Thing. Like, it's just like, I feel like people are like, oh, you've never seen it. Like, you should watch it. Or, oh, maybe it's not for you. Like, I think the horror community is very welcoming, and we do have a sense of humor. And so, and we always talk about how like horror people are the nicest people.
It's really true. It's absurd how true it is.
And the more messed up stuff someone writes, the nicer they are. I swear. It's very strange, but like I think part of that, like we talk a lot about the horror community, but like I think there's just this like, oh, you couldn't go sit at the cool kids table, like come sit under the bleachers with us, we're the real cool kids. Like there's just that kind of like vibe. So I think that helps in welcoming people in. And I think people who think they don't like horror, I think they see that, and I think they get that energy just from whatever they see on social media and kind of get a sense of how it is in real life.
Yeah, I think that the cool kids thing is that's very accurate. It's like, oh, this was a maligned genre for a long time, that has had its ups and downs in terms of commercial successes, in terms of how much of it has been out there. Horror people will talk a lot about how there was sort of a lull in horror fiction, especially in the 90s and 2000s, if your name wasn't like King or Stroud.
Yeah.
And now it's blossomed. There's something for everybody. There are, horror specific imprints at major publishers, and that's something that was unimaginable 10 years ago. And it's been really exciting to see. And one of the insane things that I do is on my website, I catalog all of the new horror books every year because I'm
Literally insane.
Yeah, literally insane.
It's the like loveliest, most amazing thing for somebody to do, and just do it like out of the goodness of your heart. it's amazing. Every author is like, that's her, because she catalogs every horror book that's coming out that year. So it's like a guide where you can go and see and be like, oh, there's a new Stephen Graham, there's like 8 new Stephen Graham Jones books, of course. So like that, yeah, bless you for doing that, because it's a lot of work. And there's always like people being like, my book's coming out on this. Like, you're like,
Oh, yeah,
totally
and,
gracious,
like,
and you're like, I'm gonna add it.
if I
Yeah,
missed it, tell me about
Yeah.
it, it'll go on there, you know? But I was finding myself frustrated because I would hear about a book that had come out a month or two before, and I was like, I'm as tapped into this scene as really it's like possible to be,
Yeah.
possibly to an unhealthy degree, and I didn't know about this book, so I started trying to solve that problem for myself, and then realized, oh, I solve this for other people too. But discoverability is such a hard thing. And this kind of comes back to what we were talking about with summer scares. If a book's been out for more than a couple weeks, that initial publicity cycle has kind of died down. People have gone on to the next new thing. And that can be really, hard for both authors and publishers to, kind of maintain that interest. And so, if there's any, like, I leave those lists up, you can go back and look, they started in 2020, and I still get traffic to the older years too. People are like, I want to see what came out last year. I want to see what I missed. And that's been something that has given me just kind of a breathtaking view into the breadth of the genre right now. It's like, there really is something for everybody. There's plenty of haunted house stories. There's plenty of vampire stories. There's plenty of, diverse voices. I mean, that has been like the most sort of startling and beautiful development in the last 5 years, that this just kind of like opened up. We want to tell everybody's story. We don't want to just tell like straight white men stories. And one of the things I love about your books is that they are so unapologetically feminine. And that can be really, really helpful for, this has been traditionally kind of a masculine genre. If you look back at, who was writing the books for a long, long time. And as with so many other things, if you're a woman and you're looking to get into, scary books, it can be really hard to know where to start and not, kind of find something that, there are older sort of classics of the genre. I'm not going to name names, but you read them now and you're like, oof. But it's nice to have so many options to point people to and say, hey, no, like you can read books by people who understand you and who like you and who don't, see you as a body upon which, horrible violence will be enacted in this fictional space, or not just that, at least.
Yeah. And I think it's nice to have some relatability in the genre, which I think, like, I didn't set out to be like, I'm gonna write feminist horror books, like I'm gonna tell women's stories. Like I just wanted to like talk about things that I think about that are relevant to me. And I think one of the most rewarding things about, right, like the reason I write and the reason I read is to like connect with other people and to feel less alone in the world. And so that's been what's been the most fulfilling to me. If somebody is like, oh, I like could relate to this, or like I found something in this, like even if it's just a line, even if it's like a throwaway line, just something silly, if they read it and they're like, oh, I felt this way before, that's all we really want as readers. And I think maybe for horror, it's hard to like, people don't think that exists within the genre. They think like, oh, it's all supernatural, it's all like, serial killers, it's all gore. But no, like there's, and it's not just in my work, it's in, trying to think of like a recent, I was talking about Christina Meester's work, like, being like, that's happened to me and it's made me so mad. And I thought it was just like, I was alone with it, but no. And so, yeah, Nat Cassidy's work too. Just thinking like these nestlings being frustrated living in New York. Like, I'm like, yeah, like I relate to that. Like, there's some things in the genre that you can like still connect to, even if it's fantastical. Like in Such Sharp Teeth, yes, it's a werewolf story, but like it's more about like being frustrated about living in a body. Like we've all had experiences where we're like, oh, this meat suit, like that's so even though it's about like, even though technically it's a werewolf book, it's not about werewolves, it's about what it is to exist. And I think that's because there are more voices. I think people are kind of understanding that horror is not like something to like, it's not pure escapism, like you can still find something in it to connect to and to be like, and you know, there's relatability in horror for weenies because I'm a weenie, I related to the book. Even just to say like, there are other people who will read the Wikipedia page versus watching the movie. Like, that was very, like, I don't admit to that. I wouldn't have admitted to that freely as a horror. Because I'd be like, I'm gonna be cast out of the community. But now I'm like, I certainly do that. I'm a weenie.
Representation matters.
You made it cool to be a weenie.
Thank you. That's honestly the dream. I'm still a weenie. That's the thing. I watch crazy scary horror movies, and I'm still like, I went to see Alien Romulus last week, and I was like, oh yeah, the ceiling is so fascinating.
How was it?
It was great.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun. And actually that's, I should have to remind myself that I'm doing book promotion. Something I've also been doing on my website, readjumpscares.com, is I've been doing something I'm calling the Weenie Report, which is entries in the style of horror for weenies on movies that are not covered in the book. Just in the sheer interest of space. I mean, there are 25 movies in this book. My initial brainstorm list of movies I wanted to talk about was more like 45. It was rough. It was a rough cutting process. But you know, people were talking about Longlegs. You know, it was a huge sort of buzzy movie that came out earlier this year, and I was like, well, I couldn't cover that in the book. I got a website. Why not?
I gotta read your weenie report about Longlegs because I saw it and I have thoughts.
I mean, we could spend the rest of the event talking about Longlegs, but that's probably not what people signed up for.
You didn't sign up to hear me complain.
Well, okay, so tell us your horror origin story. Like, how did you get into this genre? How were you initially scared off of it? Did you come to it later?
I definitely came to it later. I like talk about my relationship with horror like a rom-com where like we were enemies and we didn't like each other in youth, and then we like came back together and we're like, it's you, it's been you all along. Like I don't know why my mother did this. I appreciate it in retrospect, but like I saw Alien when I was like 3 or 4. I saw Jaws when I was 3 or 4. Like she just like showed me whatever. It's like cinema, but like and so I will not go in a body of water without being like, even a pool, I'll be like, I'm gonna get killed by a shark. And I was just very like, even Nightmare Before Christmas when I was young was too scary for me. I'm very easily frightened. My mom was like, let's go on the Haunted Mansion at Disney World, and I was like traumatized by it, like just very easily scared. I remember seeing the Blair Witch Project and just being completely like, absolutely not, when I was like 11.
What? Some questions for your mom, but
yeah, she didn't really like, it was kind of like a free-for-all household.
Fair enough.
And so I just like always thought I didn't like it. And then when I was a freshman in college, my suite mate, Maria, who's a dear friend of mine, is like a horror super fan. So she would be like, we're watching The Ring. And so we'd like, and then she'd be like, we're gonna like, it's a snowy weekend, we're gonna watch The Shining, the Kubrick version and the TV version. Like she was just very like, she was such a horror fan that it kind of rubbed off on me. And then my sophomore year, I joined a screenwriting club and they put on a contest, and it was a horror contest. And so I was like, all right, I guess I'm getting into this. And around that same time, Maria showed me The Orphanage, which is now my favorite horror movie. I had a panic attack halfway through, I had to stop watching, but then the next day I was like, no, I have to finish it. And that was kind of like my, like, I Love Josh moment where I was like, it's not about the fact that it's scary, it's the story that is so compelling underneath it that I need to, like, this doesn't exist just to scare me, it exists for something else. And I like dabbled in it like in horror before, but like that was my first like real moment of like, oh, I actually love this, like this is where I belong. And so yeah, that's kind of how I came. It wasn't like, I wish I could be like, I was a kid who like read Goosebumps, and I was like, but no, I was terrified by all of that, like scary stories to, I mean, no, like I couldn't handle any of that. Even like the the Green Ribbon Story when I was really little, like, just very easily, and I think
It's a foundational trauma for a lot of
Yeah.
people, honestly, yeah.
and you're an anxious, like, person too, so I think if you're just naturally somebody who has anxiety, like, your relationship with horror is really complicated. And I think as you get older, for me at first, like, I thought that horror made my anxiety worse, but really my anxiety was gonna be bad no matter what. And horror is actually catharsis for me, like, if I watch scary movies, it doesn't give me anxiety, it alleviates the anxiety, and reading too, so, which is something I didn't expect. What about you? What's like your origin story?
Don't blame me.
My mom, I just looked at my mom and she went, don't blame me.
She's not here, so I'm like, it was all her fault.
I mean, in retrospect, the interest was always there for me. I was always sort of like I was terrified, we've talked about this before, I was terrified of sharks when I was a kid. I mean, I'm still terrified of sharks, they're terrifying, but especially as a kid, like, same as you, any body of water, any like something behind me, you know, something under me. Even in the shower as a kid, I was like, oh, you know, I could turn around and there could be a shark right there. But all I wanted to do was watch Jaws. And my mom was like, are you sure? And I was like, yes. And I've seen Jaws upwards of probably 30 times at this point. And there was sort of a foundational moment. I talk about this in the opening to the book, but at my 10th birthday party, I had a sleepover party and I wanted to watch Poltergeist for God knows what reason.
We went to the video store and you guys picked the movies.
My mom says it's our fault. I can't remember what it was about Poltergeist that, you know, spoke to me, but I was like, yeah, sure, why not? The movie's terrifying. That is such a scary movie. We were in hysterics. We were just wrecks. Like, we were going to the bathroom in pairs the rest of the night.
I'm sure those girls went back to their parents' house, and the parents were probably like, what happened?
Yeah, exactly.
10 years old?
10 years old.
Should've been watching Spice World.
We've done plenty of that. Actually, it was exactly the year for it. Yeah. I've already seen it a million times at that point. And then that really just, I mean, it freaked me out so bad. And like for years, I was like, nope, no scary movies, no horror, can't do it. And I would occasionally get dragged to something, you know, by friends and, or very memorably, a roommate who showed me Event Horizon, and I was not prepared. But I was sort of like, oh, I don't know. And then when I started working in publishing and started kind of like just developing my reading taste as an adult, I had worked in sales at a publishing house, and there was an editor who came to me and introduced herself and said, what do you like to read? And sort of without thinking, I said, oh, I like the weird shit. And she was like, great. And she immediately sent me 2 manuscripts that she had just acquired, one of which was Tampa by Alyssa Nutting, which is not a horror novel, but it also is a horror novel. And the other was Bird Box by Josh Malerman.
Oh, wow.
And she had just acquired it. She was like, I'm really excited about this. And I read it in an afternoon, and I was like, oh, I get it now. And so I got really into reading horror, and then, you know, some years went by and I was like, well, I guess I should try the movies again. And this time around I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I want to be doing. I love this. Can't get enough of it. As I said, still a weenie, you know, I never thought I was going to watch Hereditary. I was like, no, that one's not for me, that one's too much. Guess what's in this book? I've now watched it 3 times. That's rough. I did it so you don't have to. You're welcome. But yeah, no, I love it now, and I talk about it all the time, and occasionally I still get that, like, you know, pearl clutching, like, whoa, it's so disturbing. And I'm like, yeah, I'll get you. We'll wait.
Yeah.
We'll see. You're gonna get here too.
Well, I mean, the world is so disturbing. Like, I feel like we're at the, like, it's not the 90s anymore. We can't live in ignorance. Like, you know, like, and I think that's kind of why during the pandemic, I think a lot of people turned to horror. Like, I remember watching Train to Busan during the pandemic and just being like, yeah, this is good. Like, even though it doesn't make, like, you would think watching that during global pandemic wouldn't be comforting, but it's just like, it could always get worse.
Oh, yeah.
So-
I mean, look at all the people who watched Contagion in like the early days of
Yeah,
COVID.
they were like, that's exactly what I'm gonna do right now, like,
Well, there's like that, yeah, that anxiety mitigation is like,
Yes.
if you're someone with anxiety and it's just like free floating all the time, like something's gonna go wrong, something's gonna go wrong, something's gonna go wrong right now. And when you're watching a horror movie or reading a horror book, it kind of gives that anxiety to something to latch onto and a shape that has a resolution.
yes.
So it can almost function like as therapeutic scares, which I have found really valuable. Well, I think we were gonna do some questions.
Yes. I don't know if anyone on the. You have some.
I'll start with this one and then feel free to jump in. Rachel. This is from Rachel. Do you come up with the supernatural twist first, or do you figure out character, plot, etc., and then see which horror elements fit best?
So the question was, do I come up with the supernatural first or like character plot, that stuff first? So it's kind of both. For Such Sharp Teeth, I was in the shower and just like, it's so much work to exist, and like shave my legs, I have to clean myself. And then I was thinking a lot about like, it's so much work to like exist in a body that like doesn't cooperate with me, that like I belong to it more than it belongs to me, which is a line in the book. And then also just like being someone who menstruates and like the cyclical nature of that, and being like, wait a minute, no control, cyclical, lady werewolves, like how come there's not like more lady werewolves? And then I was thinking a lot about that, like the monster as metaphor, and then that's how I like, and then I found the right character to tell that story. So it's kind of like, and for So Thirsty, I was like looking in the mirror one day, a lot of great ideas come to me in the bathroom, very angsty in the bathroom.
Aren't we all?
And just being like, oh, I'm aging, like, I look different, and being like, wait a minute, vampires don't see their reflection, and vampires don't age. And I was like, that's interesting. And then, that's, it kind of like starts from there, and then I'll like find the right person to tell the story, and then plot. We'll see where I find that.
That's a problem for future Rachel.
Yeah, that's just, she'll deal with that later. My editor somewhere, like.
So when you were talking about for Gateway Books, Hamlin said that Lauren Bukes is an amazing crossover with books like Broken Monsters and The Shining Girls.
Yeah, love Lauren Bukes. Broken Monsters, well, The Shining Girls came before Broken Monsters, and that was a, sort of an early like, oh, this is messed up. I really like this for me personally, and same with Broken Monsters. Have you read them?
I read Broken Monsters.
Yeah, so good. Shining Girls, also great. Time traveling serial killer in a row house in Chicago who opens the door and it's a different year, and he's got to go kill some, lovely young woman because
Gotta do what you do. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't watch the adaptation. The book is great.
Adaptations.
I didn't care for it
Okay.
personally, but yes.
Yeah, I think also like Cat Ward and Lauren Bukes, like if you like one, I think you would probably be into the
Absolutely.
like genre bending. Yeah.
Yeah, because Cat Ward, I mean, always manages to pull the rug out from under you in a way that you don't quite see coming, which I really appreciate, because at this point in my reading life, I feel like I can often see a twist coming.
Yeah.
But I never seem to with her. And
Yeah.
That's really impressive to me.
Yeah.
She's so cool, man.
Yeah, she's the coolest person, like just to be in her presence is just like.
What about Sarah Langan? Is she a good, I think she's a good crossover too.
Love Sarah Langan. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Another good.
Good Neighbors is, I think, her newest one,
Yes.
which I have not yet read, but it's sitting on my shelf. But I had read a couple of her earlier novels, and they do like small town Maine, you know, it's like a portrait of a town, and then everything just like crinkles around the edges and turns black and like crumples up to ash. It's so good.
Yeah, just very talented and also very like character driven, very like in terms of like relatability. Yeah. But yeah, also genre bending.
I can keep going, people.
Or does anyone in the audience have any questions?
I have a question. Along with reading your book, what suggestions would you give to folks who are eager to start watching horror movies? Suggestions on how to create an environment in which they feel at ease.
That's a great question. The question was, along with reading horror for weenies, how would I suggest someone who's curious about watching horror movies kind of curate that experience for themselves? For me, the answer was weed. Smoking weed turned out to be something that enabled me to just like detach a little bit emotionally from what was happening on screen and go like, oh, I'm like fascinated by the craft of this. I'm not like paralyzed with terror. I'm like enjoying it. Your mileage may vary. That does not work for everybody. I'm not suggesting that you know, dive right into that if it's not something you have experience with. But I think it's really about making a comfortable space for yourself. I mean, watching a horror movie in a theater is sort of necessarily a scarier experience than watching it on your couch at home with someone you like and trust, and you know, maybe a cat and a beverage and a soft blanket, which is my preferred method. In terms of like, if you're curious about starting to watch horror movies, you know, I encourage you to do so very much. Do so with care, you know, do a little research, maybe pick this up if it's a classic movie you want to dive into. But in terms of ones that are a little bit easier to start with, I mean, older horror movies are, it's not that they're not scary, it's that they tend to have a different kind of valence to a modern audience. You know, like Psycho is still a very disturbing movie, but it's not necessarily like, you know, gasp, scream, run out of the theater scary to us now. So older movies can be a really great way into that. Honestly, The Wicker Man is one of my favorites, sort of, oh, you don't like horror movies, but you're gonna like this. Because it's not all that scary and it's really kind of goofy and weird and idiosyncratic. Yeah, honestly, just do it with people you trust, people you like. Don't try to start by watching, you know, Get Out in a dark room at midnight alone.
Other questions?
Can we take a couple more?
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Gracie wants to know what advice would you give to an aspiring horror author?
I think finding community is really important. Like finding people, like writing is very isolating. And I tend to be shy, just assume people don't like me. But so it took like a while for me to be like, I like this author, I'm gonna DM them and tell them I like their work, and or like to just reach out to people and like stop being like, don't worry about like, don't hold yourself back. I think it really is helpful to like connect with other authors, other people trying to break into the horror space, and also just persistence and be good to yourself. And you really have to like love the craft. It's easy to be like, I think I used to look at writers and be like, if only I had a book deal or a book published, like my life would be rainbow and sunshine. Like it's gonna be harder than that. So don't like, just enjoy the process and enjoy writing, find community, be persistent, and yeah, rooting for you. Do you have advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of, it's almost default advice at this point, but it's so true and important, which is that you have to write about things that scare you. If you want a book to be scary and you're writing about things that you don't find particularly scary, you're probably not going to be that scary to the reader either. You write about things that are on your mind, you're working through questions for yourself. Speaking as someone who works in publishing for a long time, don't chase trends. Don't write to what you think the audience wants. Write the book that you want to write. those are always the best ones, always, bar none.
Love that. And we know that Sharp Teeth and For Weenies is not quite on the shelves yet, but Jordan would like to know what you're working on next.
I don't know if I can, the
Fair enough.
book 6 is with my editor now. And there is a haunted house, but it's not ghosts, and that's all I'll say.
I'm intrigued. I'm working on some fiction myself. It's very, very early stages, but yeah, I'm trying to make that jump, so wish me luck. Fingers crossed, you know, we'll see where it goes.
Thank you so much.
If no one else has any questions. No, I have a question. Oh, you do. Okay.
I was wondering, where do you get inspiration for the characters?
It's hard, like, it's kind of. It's hard for me, like the characters kind of just come to me, like. Sometimes it's hard for me to meet them, like for Black Sheep, my protagonist Vesper, I like. Had the concept of the book, but I needed the right person to tell the story. And I like really couldn't meet, like I didn't know who she was. I didn't have like a good sense of her. With such sharp teeth, I like sat down to write and I was like, okay, I wanna like have a confident character because I don't want them like to be like, they're gonna be angsty about the werewolf stuff, so they can't be angsty about other stuff too. Like they need to like have some confidence. And so that was like my main thing, and then I kind of met Rory, that she's very confident, she's got it going on, like she doesn't need anything. And then with Vesper, I was like, I don't know who she is. And then I was talking to my agent, and she was like, what if she worked at like an Applebee's or like somewhere where like you needed like swag? And I was like, oh, that's it. And like that's kind of how I met her. Like she's like Jennifer Aniston in Office Space, like just like so usually
It's a flair.
yeah. So there's like one thing that like usually kind of gets me into it, and then all of the other characters kind of are around to like enhance the protagonist or kind of be foils, or I base everybody else around that, like whoever's telling the story, because I write close first person, needs to be the strongest personality, and everybody else is just kind of there to kind of bounce off. And I mean I like to develop characters, so like I want them all to be fun and have like feel like real people, but they're all kind of like offshoots of whoever the protagonist is.
Do you find yourself borrowing gestures, mannerisms, phrases from people you know, like after the fact, if you are editing or something and you're like, oh yeah, my you know cousin does that, or is it more like the character does that?
It's usually more the character does that, like sometimes like my best friends and I have sometimes we'll have like shorthand, like weird things that we say to each other, or like in my writing, if I need something really specific, I'll borrow it from real life. But for the most part, I try not to get myself in trouble too much because you don't want to like put anything in there. And it's hard for me because I do borrow little details, and then I have to be like, yeah, I borrowed that detail because I needed a detail, but it's not about you. To be very, I wrote a story in my collection, Bad Dolls, and it's about like a bachelorette party, and the bride and the narrator of that story had been friends since they were like 11, and I needed specifics, so I borrowed like real life details from my friendship with my friend Deanna, and she's like, I'm reading Bad Dolls. I was like, I have to tell you things. I was like, yes, we found that Barbie Jeep and ran and drove it around the neighborhood, but it's not you. Like, yes, we did all of the things that those characters did in the story, but it's not you. So I try and generally not do that.
Fair.
Yeah, I get myself in trouble.
All right, well. Is there anything else, or
No,
I think we're
it's
kind of,
good.
I just want to say. I can take both, we're gonna close the Zoom. And I wanted to say thank you to everyone who attended online and in person. And there's, I guess, join us again, I'm like, what's happening? Oh, yes, you can buy copies of all of Rachel's books, Emily's book through Silver Unicorn. The information is on boxlib.org, the library's website, and your book comes out
September 3rd.
September 3rd, and So Thirsty.
Comes out the 10th.
Okay, so hope to see you soon again.
Thank you.
So in the Zoom, in the chat, people are like, thank you, thank you, this has been wonderful and it's fascinating and they love you and there's lots of hearts and stuff.
Fireworks.